You're just directing your attention to sense perceptions rather than thinking. So there's a shift from being absorbed in interpreting sense perceptions and just noticing the sense perceptions. I cannot predict what your reaction or response will be to this gathering. It could be a wonderful beginning of discovery of a deeper state of consciousness, or it could be that you are finding this gathering and this talk incredibly boring or irritating. What is he talking about? I can't stand it anymore. And then the mind goes on.
Sorry, sir.
Help is coming. Thank you. So this is all about what we might call the awakening of consciousness. So I'll be coming back to it again and again, this terminology, but just to summarize what that means for those of you who are new to it, is when you discover in yourself the ability to know what's happening in your inner space, either on the level of emotion or on the level of mind, so that you're beginning to find there is an observing presence there. The observing presence can observe whatever happens in your mind, the movement of thought, instead of being totally drawn into it, totally identified with it. That is the awakening, the disidentification from thought plus emotion, the disidentification from thought. So that's what it's all about. We can approach it from many different angles and directions, but the core of this is always that. So as a little exercise in awareness or presence, let's do this. I call it do, but it's not really a doing. Becoming aware of sense perceptions, because that is part of your experience of the present moment. Sense perceptions, visual, auditory are the main sense perceptions, but the others may come in too. So there's the totality of this room. There's a man sitting on a chair. You see him on the chair, you see him on the screen, stage, people. So you take that in, the voice. You're becoming aware of that. You're giving it attention. Without any strain or effort, you're just directing your attention to sense perceptions rather than thinking. So there's a shift from being absorbed in interpreting sense perceptions and just noticing the sense perceptions. Huge shift. And that's already an enormously wonderful and empowering and important spiritual teaching, to become aware of sense perceptions, sensory perceptions, and remove the interpretation of the sensory perceptions. A very fundamental, deep spiritual practice. It may sound a little strange, but to be aware of something, you can either direct your sense perception towards a particular noise that you hear in the background, whatever it may be, a bird singing or the engine noise of cars or whatever, or visually a flower or a tree or the sky or the totality of whatever surrounds you, and take in the various sense perceptions and just be with it, be alert there, be an alert presence for the sense perception, like now. There's no need to interpret. So what can you add to it? You let go of the, sometimes one should say, compulsive need to immediately find some kind of interpretation for it, naming it. The continuous naming every moment has to be immediately classified and personalized and named in some way. I like it, I don't like it, or this is not quite right. And a lot of the naming is of a negative kind. You might notice when you name, there's a difficult person around, or you observe an unconscious person behaving in an unconscious way, because what else can an unconscious person do? You can't ask them to behave in a conscious way. So you're looking at an unconscious behavior and say, awful person. And then you let go of that. It's easier with trees and flowers and with people, of course. With people, it's a more advanced stage, but I'm just pointing it out already, because you have ample opportunity in this world, in your life, to practice with people continuously. You may have noticed people are not easy. They're difficult. And some are quite crazy, but we'll go to that. And there are moments of craziness and relative sanity, and then they got crazy again. That's another story. You might remember your ex-husband or wife. So sense perception, bringing just awareness to sense perception, like now. You can do it in your room. You sit in your room alone and look around the room. Let go of the mind wanting to say something. You don't need it. So instead of naming, there's just an awareness behind the sense perception. That's a spiritual practice. You can do it anywhere. I recommend it that you do it whenever you're waiting for something to happen. Even a simple thing like waiting for the elevator to come, or while you're riding in the elevator, or you're waiting at the traffic light, or you're waiting for on the phone, you're waiting for your bank to speak to a human being. Half an hour, an hour. But that may be too much for this spiritual practice to start with. So whenever you're waiting, and you might be surprised how many times of your day you are waiting for something. Now, most of the time, unfortunately, these days, when humans are waiting for something, even at the elevator or in the lineup in the supermarket, whatever it may be, airport, there's a lot of waiting at airports these days. So wherever they are, unfortunately, most humans immediately get hold of this device. Even I have one. Here it is. They can't wait. They cannot give themselves even half a minute without needing to fill this half a minute with something. Now, before they invented this, it was a little bit more difficult. You had to fill it with something. You had to think of something, or you became restless. Waiting, the elevator is still not coming. It's only been 20 seconds. But now, of course, you have this. You can immediately go because everybody else is doing it too, so you have to do it too. So you pull this out. There's nothing in particular happening, but everybody's doing it, so you do it too. And you're adding to the clutter of your mind, and you're adding to the unawareness of the present moment. And even worse it is when you're out, let's say you're out in nature, and then you're on a bench, you're sitting on the beach or somewhere, wherever it may be, going up. Even there, some people cannot let go of this, because this is an extension of the thinking mind. The thinking mind was already a huge challenge and a problem for thousands of years. It grew and grew and grew, and then the thinking mind was so clever that it came up with an extension of itself in the form of this. And now it's even more challenging because it amplifies the thinking mind. It amplifies and adds to the clutter of your mind. Clutter meaning useless thinking, just going around in circles, ruminating, and at night even when you can't sleep. And a lot of the thinking is not pleasant for most people. You don't think for very long about a wonderful sunset that you saw last night or 2 days ago. That was such a wonderful sunset. You can't do a lot of thinking. The mind needs something else. It needs a difficult person to think about, somebody who was rude to you last week. And you cannot let go of the memory of that and what you should have said to him, but you didn't. But now you can do it in your mind. Or what may happen tomorrow or the next week. You have to think about that now, because otherwise it'll all fall apart if I don't think about this now. And so people don't realize that they live with a burden of unconscious thinking. I'm not talking about useful thinking when there's something to apply your mind to. There's a problem that needs to be solved, and what can we do? What can I do about it? Let's look at this and that and that. The mind is a very wonderful thing when you are not the slave of your mind. So a lot of that thinking is actually destructive and unpleasant. People don't realize that the burden they carry in their minds, the burden of, for many people, an unhappy story they carry in their minds, and they think about it. And what is that unhappy narrative they carry in their mind? What do they call it? They call it my life. Oh, my life. So, why did it go wrong so many times there? And that shouldn't have happened. I had imagined it when I was 17 and 18. I imagined something real, very different, but that didn't happen. And then, of course, there are good things too. It's for many people. It's the narrative of my life is a mixed bag of good and bad. But for many others, my life is very problematic, and I cannot stop thinking about it. And the story, I have to tell myself, the story of me and my life. And anybody who wants to listen, I'll tell them the story too, of me and my life. Are you ready to listen to my life? Okay, and then I'll tell you mine, okay. That is the narrative in your mind that you confuse with who you are, which is all your memories, accumulated memories, not necessarily objectively true, some maybe, but many of the memories are colored by faulty interpretations of what people did or said or did. You can verify this if you have siblings and you're grown up, and then you talk about events that happened in your childhood when we were 6 years old. You talk to your brother or your sister. Do you remember this event when I was 6 and you were 8 or you were 7? Do you remember what happened? And then your sibling says, no, that's not what happened. So this is what happened. It's completely different. But each one thinks that's exactly how it is. And in some cases, it may well be. But whatever it is, it's a memory in your mind. You replay it, an old movie. It replays itself. And often involving people, what somebody did to you. Undoubtedly, they did do that to you. And they shouldn't have done it. This is very true. Many people have had relatively unconscious parents. They did their best, but nobody can act beyond their level of consciousness. I realized that it was a wonderful liberation when I realized, I was ready later in my life, I realized that my parents could not have acted differently because that would have been beyond their level of consciousness at that particular time. If I reincarnate again, it will be a kind of service to humanity or an offering. But I mean, who would want to go? Would you want to go through your childhood again or some other kind of childhood? My God. Well, I haven't gone through physical death yet, as the Zen master who was asked about life after death said, I don't know. And they said, why don't you know? You're the master. And he said, yeah, but I'm not a dead master. But I've gone very deeply to what one could call death to identification with form. So in a way I have gone into that realm from where I can say and know that ultimately what we see as death is the dissolution of form, that the eternal in us, which I know that firsthand, cannot be touched by that. So what exactly happens, I would say, depends on whatever state of consciousness you were in. That was be a predominant state of consciousness in this lifetime. If in this lifetime you were continuously identified with form, your body, or the psychological form of me, that means consciousness, this expression of consciousness, was still in a somewhat dreamlike state, which is identification with form. And you can easily extrapolate from that if the tendency of consciousness to identify with form was still there, which in other ways the awakening had not happened. This tendency will continue, there will be further identification with form, and the process will continue as the consciousness that is not yet fully awake will continue to identify with form again, and then gradually come to a place where awakening happens. Or if there has already been a disidentification from form in this lifetime, then you can extrapolate from there that the compulsive urge to identify with form and to seek another form or another cycle of form identification, this compulsion to seek further experiences through identifying with form then would either be much weaker or be completely absent, in which case the consciousness that you are is no longer bound to this realm and will not seek to re-experience the realm of form. But in either case, you really, I can tell you that all is well. It does not really matter whether this person now needs further experiences of identification, in which case this will happen, or whether he is already free of this urge, in which case he will move on and live in a realm that we can't even conceive of from where we are here. I get a sense deep within in the forms of what that is, but we don't need to talk about it here. All we know is nothing. This is the beginning of A Course in Miracles, which is the entire Course in Miracles summarized in 2 lines. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists.
herein lies the peace of God. That which is real in him is beyond form. Anybody can know that when you see a dead body, you realize that this is no longer whom you knew. This is not the being that you knew. This is only a shell. So nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal ultimately exists. This is why sages from all traditions speak of this realm of form as ultimately illusory. It depends what level you look at. The important thing is all is well. Beyond the appearance on the level of form, which is the only level where death exists, it is the transition from one form into another form, or from one form into formlessness. That is what death is, no more than that. Nothing real dies. Nothing real dies. Which is to say, ultimately, there is no such thing as death. There only seems to be. It's a transmutation of form. Either form dissolves or seeks some other form, some other identification with form. That,
as you know, Buddhists and some others are striving towards the end of reincarnation. They are striving towards merging with the absolute Buddha nature. And you can find in yourself, perhaps, people sometimes ask, would you like to reincarnate again? Or have you had enough? And if you looked into yourself, you may find also that depends on how fearful you are of death. Because there's an urge, there's an unconscious urge in humans, and that makes part of the ego, personality and the ego, the urge for sensory experience, the urge for asserting your form identity and to experience more of the sensory realm. So for some people it would be dreadful not to be able not to reincarnate again, because there's a longing for more of that physical sensory experience and the experience of all kinds of things associated with the personal selfhood. And so there's still the unawakened entity or semi-awakened entity that still is drawn towards reincarnation. Which means to take form again. When the urge is not there anymore, you can find in yourself, do I want to reincarnate here again? Well, I certainly have no urge for further sensory experience. If I reincarnate again, it will be a kind of service to humanity or an offering. But I mean, who would want to go? Would you want to go through your childhood again, or some other kind of childhood? My God. And then I hear some people say, I definitely have had enough of this, and I do not want to reincarnate again. And then you say, oh, maybe that human being is very advanced. But then it might be the next day that human being is talking to the bank manager on the phone and gets very upset about something. Now, I thought he or she had said they don't want to reincarnate again, but they are reincarnating again into complete identification with an arising mental emotional reaction. Every time you identify with a thought and an emotion completely, you reincarnate, you take form into that. So ultimately the end of the cycle of reincarnation in Buddhism It has to take place in your lifetime, rather than having an idea that at some point you will reach the end of the cycle of samsara and you will not. No, the question is, are you still continuously reincarnating into form, which means losing completely awareness of yourself as awareness. The essence identity is not lost, but totally covered up. So you don't really know whether or not you are going to reincarnate. You have to observe yourself in daily life to know whether or not you are ready to go beyond the continuous cycle of reincarnation. The question is, how often in the course of one day do you reincarnate? The first thing to discover experientially is, as I've said before, it sounds a little strange, is that you are essentially invisible. You, not only what I can see of you is the body, and sometimes I may be able to see certain things in your mental emotional field. I can hear words that you speak, or your facial expressions. I'm talking to everybody, not just to Tina, but I can see facial expressions that kind of give me a hint of what you're feeling or thinking. But anybody who was looking for you in the realm of physicality would not find you. And if that's too much, let's just go for a moment let's talk about, this perhaps makes sense to anybody who has a dog or a cat at home. When your dog or cat dies, which can be a very sad thing for people, and we come to humans later, it might be a little bit easier to start with the dog or cat. You may realize in that moment when suddenly the dog is dead or the cat is dead, but everything is still there, the fur, the body. There may even be some warmth left in the body, and there it is. But that which you essentially loved and related to in the dog or the cat isn't there anymore. So you can still, the touch is still the same, but something essentially is gone, and that was always invisible. What you love in the dog is ultimately, or the dog, you might love the way the dog looks and what it does, but when you relate to a dog, you essentially love, although nobody might have actually expressed it like that consciously, you love the consciousness of the dog. That's what you love in the dog. And when you look into the eyes of the dog, what's looking back at you is there's a consciousness of the dog looking back at you. And when that's gone, the dog is, and same with the human. What you love in a human is the consciousness of the other human. Now, you yourself, all that is invisible, because consciousness is the greatest mystery in the universe that science still has no idea what to do with it, cannot explain consciousness, and in most cases avoids talking about consciousness. The greatest mystery is the fact that the universe is conscious and that you are conscious. A surgeon looking for you by cutting open your skull and analyzing your brain will not find even a trace of you. Will not even find any of your countless hundreds of thousands or million memories that you have somewhere. In what form does a memory survive in you? Is the memory of your first teacher at school? I just mentioned the word and suddenly an image of the first teacher you had at school comes to you. The memory of your grandmother who passed away, the memory of the bed that you slept in when you were 8 or 10 years old. I just need to mention it. It was somewhere, but where did that live in you? Was that in a molecule or an atom? The one atom was your bed? Or what is it? Nobody knows, and nobody can find even the memories that you make up the person that you are.
And the amazing thing is that the realization of this truth is already gone, is there throughout. You go back thousands of years and it's already there. It has come out. There's a little thread running through of a few people here and there, always throughout history, have realized that truth. It runs through history, the undercurrent, not the madness of history. There's a thread. Sometimes it's called the perennial philosophy, that which the timeless truth of human existence has already been there, but very few people were able to realize it. Many people who came into contact with those teachings but were unable to realize them, so they only looked at the teachings through the mind, they misinterpreted, and the very same teaching became part of their false sense of self. This is quite common in religion. All religion points to the transcendent, but what has happened is that in most cases, religion has become part of the false sense of self, the opposite of transcendence. Well, it's funny and sad at the same time. It's probably better to see it as funny. When you see the human dilemma, the human unconsciousness, when you see those basic patterns, or this one basic pattern of delusion, when you see it and recognize it, first perhaps in others, you can see others doing it, and then eventually in yourself, then if you laugh, sometimes you can't help, especially if you see it in yourself, you may begin to laugh, and that's liberating. That's a moment of transcendence too. And then you see all my drama, the last 20 years, 30 years, it's been manufactured by my mind out of nothing, for nothing. Complaining about situations and people and feeling this and that in the sense of self is this, all based on one basic delusion. One basic delusion creating the entire drama of my existence and dreadful suffering. Ooh. Can't take anymore. So then it's a beautiful thing then when through this the nightmare of your life turns into a dream that's quite pleasant, because the way in which you experience life changes when the transcendent dimension comes in. It changes the way in which you experience life, because you no longer then experience life through the filter of a false self. And the false self distorts everything that you experience. The false self wants the conflict. The false self wants the unhappiness. It doesn't know that, but why does it want it? Because it strengthens itself through it. So you can see it when you observe people in daily life, how they do it. They want it because it gives them a stronger sense of who they are. It can start with a simple thing like complaining about situations and other people or your own life. Complete distortion, you're looking at it through the false sense of self, which through every little complaint strengthens itself. Because when you complain about something, it means something is found deficient. It could be a place where you are. Oh, look at this. Oh, it's dreadful. or a person that you've just met, and then you complain about him or her. Whatever. Something is found deficient, which means you put yourself in a superior position to that situation. You are the judge of it. You're the judge of this situation or this place or this person. You're judging it as wanting in the old sense, not wanting something, but wanting meaning lacking. Yeah. And so you become really superior to whoever you complain about or criticize. It enhances the false sense of self. And you can sometimes see it in people who have nothing else to identify with. They run around the street shouting angry obscenities or remarks to everybody who comes past. You. It's their sense of self, their false sense of self, strengthens itself through accusing everybody of being bad and evil, or whatever they say. Wow, that gets stronger and stronger. I have to do this because I have nothing else I can identify with. I need those thought forms. It can be very strong. So what we need to learn is take attention out of thinking. That is transcendence. You transcend the primordial forms, which are thoughts. And then in your life you have form and space. In daily life, there's not just forms, one thought after another, one reaction after another, one thing happening after another. Forms. If you're not doing something, you have to think about this and just chasing forms, really forms chasing you, you chasing forms. And then you go to sleep for a while, and then you wake up and you have 1 minute before you remember. Like the dog chasing the rabbit. That's a dreadful thing. There's only form in my life. Just things that I have to think about and do and be worried about and react against. Forms, 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 forms. No space. And now there begins to be also space in your life. And that changes everything. So while forms happen, there's the need compulsively to impose interpretation on what's happening goes, and you allow what is, people, situations, places, which before you would have criticized or complained about. They are as they are. Of course they are as they are. Are they a problem? No, if you don't criticize and complain, they're not a problem. Can you still take action if things need to be changed? Very often action is necessary and perfectly fine without the complaining about it. You take action without complaining, and it's a different action that flows, different energy flows into what you do. And then you move through life as a spacious being, not a heavily burdened personality. A spacious, that is, nothing else is spiritual, if we want to use the word spiritual. Spiritual has nothing to do with what kind of thoughts go through your head. You can think about angels and God for 24 hours a day. It's not spiritual. Spiritual is not identifying with thought. That's when there is space in you. That's the spiritual dimension. And that's the liberation. That is the transcendence of your mind, the transcendence of, you can call it the transcendence of the world. You can call it the transcendence of time, because this is the time, the space in you is the timeless dimension.
When I grew up, it was a Methodist teaching, and it was sort of dry. Yet there was this prayer, Lord, forgive us our trespasses, and forgive us those who trespass against us. And when you opened the door last time to the book, the Course in Miracles, then I came across that principle of the forgiveness. And I had a question on that. What is forgiveness? Is it different from compassion? Is it different from the Buddhist concept of bodhicitta? And I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, it comes back to the state of connectedness with being. It's only from that state of connectedness with the deeper dimension of who you are. From there, it becomes easier to forgive, because forgive means there was something that was done on the level of form, by one life form to you, perhaps another life form. Pain was inflicted, or whatever it may be, whatever the transgression is. And it's only from there that you can see the relative nature of what was done, because you are in touch with a space within you that was never hurt by that. That dimension in you is beyond what can be injured. It's only the form can be injured. The psychological form, somebody might have insulted you deeply. The psychological form of who you are can feel pain, or the physical form of who you are can feel pain. and somebody inflicted that out of unconsciousness, then recognizing, the first step in forgiving is to recognize that this was an act of unconsciousness, and you do not equate what this person did with who that person is. And it's only from the place of connectedness with being that you can say, no longer hold a grievance about that, because you are in touch with that inside you that is beyond what can be injured. If you're not in touch with that space, then it's hard to forgive. Forgiving means not to harbor grievance or resentment or any negative feeling about it. And really, that's only possible when you are connected with the formless in yourself. As Course in Miracles says, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Nothing real can be threatened. This means what is ultimately real cannot be threatened, but what is ultimately real is not the form. It's that which is deeper than the form. That cannot be threatened. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal ultimately exists. It just seems to. Herein lies the peace of God means in the knowing of that lies the peace of God. But it needs to be not conceptual knowing, but a knowing on the level of the depth of your being. And then from there you can look at anything anybody did to you and say it's almost as if it didn't happen. For a while, for example, I harbored grievances against my father for many years because he suffered from enormous amount of bottled up anger, and living with him as a child was like living with a powder keg or an unexploded bomb somewhere in the house. And one knew that at any moment, the slightest thing somebody said, and usually it was my mother, the slightest thing somebody said, and this bomb would explode, and the entire house would be filled with destructive energy. And for a sensitive child, and any child is sensitive, young child, it's a terrible thing to live in constant anguish. Any explosion could be happening at any moment, whenever he's in the house. So I had the ambivalent feelings of fearing his return home after work and wanting him to come home, divided. And that was expressed once in a dream that I had as a child. And in the dream, I had cut my father up into little pieces and put in a plastic or some kind of sack and hidden under the bed. And after I had done that in the dream, my father arrived home and I greeted him and loved him. And of course, all this resulted, even after when I was an adult already, resulted in quite a bit of grievance towards him, because my childhood was fearful and unpleasant as a result. And it was only when a transformation happened inside me and there was suddenly that deep inner peace that I realized he did what he did according to the way in which life had conditioned him. When he was a child, he had an enormous amount of resentment against his family because and of course the story can go on many generations. He was the seventh child. His father died when he was 15, and they took him out of the school. They had to pay for school, boarding school. They took him out of boarding school because they said, we can't afford it anymore. But his sisters were still kept in boarding school. And then he had to do menial jobs. And every day his anger was growing and growing and growing. He carried it around the rest of his life. there was not enough consciousness in him to disidentify from the anger. The anger was using him. It lived in him as an energy field, and he could come up any time. He was as much a victim as I was. And I saw that after I had gone through the transformation and found inner peace. I could see that he was a victim of his own circumstances. There was not enough consciousness in him to see what he was doing. And immediately forgiveness happened. I didn't even have to say, I have to try to forgive. He never did. It was as if he had never done anything to me, because basically he hadn't. He wasn't even there. There was only the unconsciousness in him acting up. And then, as he grew older, some of that anger dissipated. Remnants of it remained. He also came into touch with some spiritual teachings, especially the power of now, and that helped to some extent. And so his ego grew less, didn't quite disappear, but it grew less. When I was a child, his ego was gigantic, and it was continuously fueled by anger. And an angry ego is something, it's the Incredible Hulk. So the forgiveness happened naturally, and very often you see that when an injury happens, very often there's a mental judgment of a situation, and actually beyond that mental judgment, not that much happened. Let's take a simple example. You arrange to meet somebody, or somebody, he says, I'm going to help you with your moving, I'm going to help you move house, I'll be there at 5 o'clock to help you move with my car, and he doesn't turn up. And that just is as it is. Now your mind then comes in and says, he let me down, he betrayed me, or he was, whatever the judgment of the mind is, and it is very often the judgment of the situation that creates the emotion that feels injured. If you can just be with, he said he would come, but he didn't turn up, that's the fact. Whatever your mind wants to add to it gives you the sense of injury and strengthens the ego. So if you can just be with the pure facts, this is why all that stuff when people are talking about other people, what they failed to do or what they did, what he did to me, he betrayed me. Well, what did he do? Well, he went off with another woman or man. He betrayed me. Betrayed me is an interpretation, and the more you have that thought that he betrayed me, the more you feel the emotion that goes with that thought. And you feel, and who is it that feels that emotion? The egoic self feels betrayed, because who you deeply are, who you are in your essence, doesn't feel betrayed. The fact is, he went off with another woman. That's what he did. Is that all? Yeah, that's what he did. If you refrain from adding a story to it, then you don't experience this comes easy when you are connected with who you truly are, then it is easy to let go of the unnecessary imposition of stories upon events. The event is neutral. The story interpretation of it is what creates the anguish.
The hardest knowledge, obviously, is self-knowledge. That's why the ancient Greeks, like Plato, Socrates, the main one, said, his main dictum is know thyself. That's the most important thing in life, Socrates said. By the way, he lived about the same time as the Buddha. He said, the most important thing is know thyself. And that was inscribed at the Temple of Delphi in ancient Greece. Know thyself. Another strange inscription, and that takes us now to where we are going. On the same temple inscribed was saying that for a long time people couldn't interpret. They thought something was missing. The other words on the temple was, so on the other side of the temple, you are in Greek. You are. And so the archaeologists looked into, there's something missing here. You are, and they tried, is there another word that you are? But there was no other word. You are. Know thyself. You are. Oh. Then at some point, somebody understood what it probably meant. It was pointing to a deeper dimension of who you are. But the real knowing yourself is not just knowing the personality. That's only one level. It's not the deepest level of knowing yourself. It's important too to know all the stuff that runs you, that operates in you as a conditioning of your mind. This kind of thing people go to a psychoanalyst for. They want to know thyself. What the psychoanalyst or psychiatrist can do for you is he can show you all kinds of things from your past. And if you go to a psychoanalyst, you can go for many years. Some people go for 20 years, 20, 30 years to a psychoanalyst, once or twice a week. Okay, and the story goes on, and discover more and more intricate things about your childhood. And then what happened? And how did you feel about that? And then what did your mother say? And then up to a point it's helpful, but then it goes on. And you get trapped in that level. And it becomes more and more complex. One level of knowing yourself is knowing how your ego operates, being able to witness it. For example, as I mentioned, in an argument, you become emotional and you witness it. Oh, so another faculty is there behind the conditioned mind that can observe what you're doing and say, oh, you're becoming very angry about nothing. So maybe you're shouting, but in the back there's something that has arisen. It's an awareness. It says you're shouting about nothing. You're witnessing what the ego is doing. This means that the beginning of the end of the ego. The witnessing faculty is the awareness. You are. So if you translate it into you, you'd have to say, I am. Okay. I am. And what am I? So let's investigate now this level of deeper identity. I call it the deep I as opposed to the surface I. The deep I, to find that which is underneath the person. And in order to find that, the stream of thinking that sustains that personal sense of self needs momentarily come to a cessation. And that's why I started this evening with observing your breath, because that can bring about a brief sensation in the stream of thinking. And in that moment, awareness remains, consciousness remains, but it doesn't become thought. And this is a very strange thing to realize from the egoic point of view. So what, says the ego? It doesn't realize that that is of extraordinary importance to find that, to discover that dimension that is deeper than the egoic self, that is a dimension of consciousness before it becomes thought. So the most vital realization for you is to realize that there are spaces in your mind that you just need to discover, or really ultimately only one space. You discover that there is a space in you where you can be conscious without needing to think, but you're very alert. You're completely here. Another word for it, some words can be helpful as pointers. Another word for it is stillness. You discover a dimension of stillness within you. Stillness means consciousness without the movement of thought. Wow. And you can still perceive everything. In fact, you perceive it more acutely, more deeply, when you are not labeling mentally thought, when you are not labeling mentally what you're perceiving. You can look around, flower, room, sky. Everything is there. You know what you're looking at without calling it anything, without concept. And you haven't gone to sleep, because normally humans becoming free of thinking, the only way they can do that when they haven't awakened, they have to go to sleep, or they have to take some kind of drug that slows down your mind. There may be a place for drugs in certain cases, sacred surroundings. Don't need to go there, it takes too long. But the discovery that stillness, which is unconditioned consciousness, which is deeper than the person, is always there, but it's covered up by the noise of the mind. And you are completely identified with this surface movement. So you can't find the deeper self, where there is enormous peace and a deep sense of aliveness that gives you everything that you had been looking for as a surface egoic entity in this realm of this physical realm, or this even psychological realm. You were looking for that, never finding this ultimate sense of being home, having arrived, you feeling at home in the universe, rather than being alienated. Alienation is a very common mental illness for millions of humans, especially modern day humans. So the most important discovery for you is discover there's something deeper in you than the person. They're not separate in the same way that the ripple on the surface of the ocean is not separate from the ocean. The ripple is a surface phenomenon. It's something that the ocean does. And you are something that consciousness, universal, the one universal consciousness that pervades the entire universe, but is transcendent to this universe. It is something that consciousness does. It creates the image of a person, like the ocean produces a ripple or a wave on the surface. And there goes a little ripple, and it has a name. Whatever name you have for you as the ripple, that's me. And the ripple is uneasy because it's surrounded by many, many other ripples, and you never know what they want. some ripples may be dangerous, they don't want, you may defend yourself, and others you think, if I incorporate this ripple into myself, I become a bigger ripple. I need you. In other words, you fall in love. I'm not talking about real love. I'm talking about falling in love, which is, come, I need you. Don't you dare leave me, though. So the ripple would lead to a very uneasy existence because it doesn't know that it is part of the ocean. You know by now that I'm talking about you as the human. Every human is a ripple on the surface of being, the vastness of being, of consciousness. We're only interested in one thing here for our life meditation, and that is to sit together, not physically together, but nevertheless together in presence. Thinking is not important here. As much as possible, let go of thinking without any effort. And realize that you are more fully yourself when you're not thinking. And when you're not thinking, you can realize what being is, what it means to be. And you can sense the being that you are, which can be expressed as the first person singular of the verb to be, I am. So you sense, or you are, the presence prior to thinking, the clear space of presence. That's why we're here, to be that, to realize that we are that. I don't think as I sit here. The words just come out of the stillness.
There's no thinking prior to the words, and as soon as a word has been uttered, there's just presence or stillness. So you can join me in that. As I don't need to think, you don't need to think right now, but just be present. The great teacher Ramana Maharshi, who taught during the first half of the 20th century in India, was once asked by a visitor to his ashram this question: how do I know whether I'm making progress on the spiritual path? And he said, the degree of absence of thought is the only true criterion for your progress on the spiritual path. The extent, in other words, to which you are free of thought in daily life. Still able to use thought whenever it's needed, perfectly, more efficiently than before, more creatively, because you have access to the unconditioned intelligence itself, which is presence. How long you can sit in meditation, formal meditation, is not a good criterion for progress on the spiritual path, but to what extent presence comes into your daily life. Which initially may just mean little moments of presence in between all the doings of your life, little moments of being, awareness, alertness, alert stillness, consciously looking at something, consciously listening, consciously walking across the room, consciously washing your hands, which does not mean when you walk across the room you're thinking, I am now crossing the room. Or when you look at something, I'm now looking at that tree, that you're not present yet. It can be an intermediate step But the actual presence is when there's no background commentary. And when there's virtually no background commentary throughout your life, that is the awakened state. There may still be fragments of thoughts saying this or that, but basically or fundamentally free of the involuntary, compulsive background commentary in your daily life. That's an enormous evolutionary leap to live like that. But you don't need to have that as some aim. I want to be totally free. Just be free of background commentary now. That's easier than to say, throughout my life I want to be free of that. Well, just do it now. Renounce unnecessary thinking. Be present instead. Then the ego diminishes and eventually cannot survive in you when you're present. People have practiced traditionally all kinds of renunciations in spiritual life, in Christianity and Buddhism and Hinduism and so on. And they're still being practiced in many cultures to some extent. Renunciation of possessions, renunciation of your name, let go of your old name, adopt a new spiritual name. Renunciation of physical comforts, exposing the body to discomfort. All these can be helpful, but if the most basic renunciation is not known, then the most basic attachment will still be there. And that's attachment to your thoughts. You haven't renounced unnecessary thinking. setting aside a period for being present is traditionally called meditation. So you could say that that's what we are doing here. Although we are not really doing anything. All we are doing, which is not a doing, is realizing our presence. Realizing presence. Right now, in different parts of the planet, little points of consciousness waking up, where before there was only a person, there's now conscious presence arising. Different parts of the planet at the same time. And this, of course, has no form. And there's no time. Past and future become irrelevant in presence. And that's an amazing realization that who you essentially are, your feeling of identity, of essential identity, does not need the future to complete itself. It is already complete. It does not need the past. So you don't need past to know who you are. That's a delusion. It's a story. You don't need future to finally arrive at some more complete version of yourself, because presence is already complete. You are already complete in presence. One could say presence is the cream, and whatever happens in time, and whatever happens in future to you is the skimmed milk. But once you know the cream and have the cream, then skimmed milk is not that important anymore. So as more presence arises, you lose the fear of death. Which of course arises because you unconsciously think you need more time to be fully yourself. Of course, the truth is you need to get out of time to be fully yourself. So we are here relaxed and alert at the same time. Alertness does not require tension. And to be free of tension does not mean that you're going towards sleep. And at this moment, who are you? With no reference to your story, the space of presence. Not a person. You still look like a person from the outside. So with this shift, the person recedes and presence arises. You don't lose anything real in this. But what about my personal identity? I don't want to lose that. If you look more deeply, at the bottom of what you feel is your personal identity, there's the fact that right now you are conscious. That's the foundation of what you sense and call your personal identity. It's consciousness is your personal identity. It gives light to the story of who you are, which consists of thoughts and past. Past is thoughts. The consciousness is the light behind your story. Without it, there would be nothing. Let's close our eyes for a moment and just continue to be present without any visual perception. If thoughts interfere, take your attention into the inner body. Feel the aliveness inside the body. Be present with every cell of the body. Presence, of course, transcends the body, but it shines through the form. Open your eyes. Look around the room, wherever you are, and stay present. Be the awareness behind the perceptions. Innocent, fresh perception. Alert perception. The hand back at the screen. As we finish our meditation, you may want to sit a little longer in the stillness. And when you then start moving again, start doing things, carry that presence as much as possible with you. As I don't have my bell with me, I will now simulate the bell as best I can. Bing. I think once is enough. Thank you.